New York State has a corruption problem, and I'm not telling anyone anything that they don't know. And if you were going to liken the severity of our problem, it's a cancer in our state's government. And frankly, this watered-down bill that comes at the 11th hour without a matching Senate bill, I mean, everyone's familiar with Schoolhouse Rock and how a bill becomes a law. You don't have a Senate sponsor for this bill at the 11th hour. It's a watered-down version. If you're going to continue the severity analogy of a cancer, this is an aspirin approach to the problem. It's disingenuous the way that it's been brought forward. It appears as though the Assembly is trying to do something. However, really what we've done is we've now created a schism between the Senate and the Assembly, and we're very likely to leave here without having any meaningful pension forfeiture constitutional amendment action taken. And again, I go back to what was agreed on by the three men in a room negotiations, part of our budget process at the end of March, where there was specific bill language that was agreed to, supposedly, by all parties, and that's needed to go forward. The constitutional amendments, if you look at our Constitution, they're pretty straightforward. They don't get into extreme detail. That's the purpose of enabling legislation. That's the negotiation that follows after a constitutional amendment has been forwarded. So to get down in the weeds by giving specific carve-outs to specific classes of employees and sentencing guidelines to judges is certainly not the norm when you're talking about a constitutional amendment. That comes later in the process. And then, of course, after that, there's sentencing guidelines that are written, and ultimately, prosecutors and the judicial system has a mechanism in place to decide justice on a case-by-case basis. So to try to hamstring that process by writing a constitutional amendment that would try to foresee every possible scenario not only is onerous, but it borders on the ridiculous. So my pension forfeiture bill, which I first introduced the first month I was elected to office in January 2013, is very simple, it's very straightforward, and it talks about, and frankly, others that have followed have been very similar to that. So, you know, throwing out the most recent proposal by the Assembly majority and going with any of two or three other pension forfeiture bills would accomplish the basics. It would allow for legislation that would give the option to judges to withdraw a pension from a corrupt official convicted of felony corruption that certainly I think the public has seen all too much of out of Albany and out of state officials around our state. So I join with the leader and my fellow colleagues here in the Republican Conference. I think it's also noteworthy to point out that one of these other versions of the pension forfeiture bill that isn't watered down had a majority of Assembly members on it. There was, I believe, more than 90 out of 150 Assembly members on it. So that right there, you know, people that have signed their name, that have lent their name to support legislation, clearly there's a clear majority for real pension forfeiture language. And you know, I think we can certainly scratch our heads and perhaps question the motivation of this latest pension forfeiture bill, but you know, certainly we can assume that there's enough support in the Assembly chamber to support the agreement that came out of the budget negotiation process. That's what the public and everyone understood we were heading in the direction of. That's what the Senate voted on March 31st. That's what we should have voted on March 31st, and yet here we are 6 days left of session, and now we've created two separate bills that don't match with each other, and therefore it looks like a good chance that this opportunity will slip away from us.